Dear listeners, I have so much to tell you, and I often don't know where to start. It seems the world doesn't want to admit that sometimes we make mistakes and that sometimes the wrong person gets punished for something they didn't do. Not all of us have been personally affected, but many of us have been impacted by this reality. And I feel like it's my responsibility to share these stories with you and to tell you what I've learned about wrongful convictions. I have the great privilege of being joined by someone who never asked to be part of the criminal justice system. Someone who, like many families of the wrongfully convicted, was suddenly and traumatically pulled into it. Linda Gallant is the sister of Ron Dalton. Ron was wrongfully convicted of killing his wife Brenda in 1988. But before the courtrooms, the appeals, and the exoneration, there was just shock, confusion, and chaos. As Linda tells us, her journey into the world of wrongful convictions began with a single devastating phone call and quickly turned into a whirlwind of grief, disbelief, and legal uncertainty. I am so grateful to Linda for bringing us a powerful and deeply personal perspective on the impacts of wrongful conviction, not from the person who was accused, but from someone who lived through it alongside him. For Linda, Ron's wrongful conviction was as much hers as it was his, just obviously in a very different way. In this conversation, she walks us through those early days where she had to fly across provinces to help her brother, unexpectedly become a mother of 6 young children who were under the age of 10, and all of this overnight, and slowly realize that the system she had always trusted wasn't working in the ways that she believed it would. While this was so incredibly taxing, Linda did it in an unflinching manner, and she continues to recount these times with incredible humility. In this conversation, she reflects on what it means to be a family member of someone who's been wrongfully convicted, the emotional toll, the relentless fight for truth, and the ways in which wrongful convictions ripple through entire families and communities. This isn't just a conversation about a wrongful conviction. It's one that highlights how entire families get pulled into the fallout, about what it means to navigate unimaginable circumstances with such little guidance, and how quickly our normal life can disappear. This is a conversation about resilience, solidarity, and the enduring strength of sibling bonds in the face of a system that got it wrong. Welcome, Linda, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really interested in having a conversation with you. I just recently heard you speak at the Innocence Canada AGM, and it was really interesting to me to hear the perspective of a family member of an exoneree. So perhaps for the rest of the world, we can just start with a brief introduction of who you are and what your tie to this crazy world is.
Well, my brother was wrongfully incarcerated in 1989. The whole thing started in 1988 when his then wife passed away. Um, and it just began a terrible ordeal for us of, about 12 years actually. My husband and I had been asked by Ron and his wife Brenda just that summer when they were here on PEI that if anything happened to them, would we look after their children? We had 3 children of our own, and they had 3 children. And we said, sure, we would do that, and kind of half thinking that what could ever happen? Like, what happens to 2 people at the same time?
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that I find, because I'm the age that I have friends who have children, and, people ask their friends this question, but
Yes.
I don't think anybody ever thinks that anything is going to come of it.
No. And not that we made the decision lightly, but we also knew, like, Brenda had family and we had 2 other brothers, but they picked us. So we said yes, and off they went back to Newfoundland. And little did we know that approximately a month later, we would be asked to actually look after their children. And it was a terrible time. We got a phone call, and my mother actually called me, and my husband came home from work, and we were told that Brenda had passed away the night before. So then, knowing that Ron was there by himself with three children, one that was 18 months old, one that was 6 years old, and one that was 9, my mother and I hopped on a plane and flew over to Gander to help him bring the children home. That was our intent. When we arrived, someone that worked with Ron at the bank picked us up at the airport. And so that was great. We got to his house. I was familiar with his house because we had visited the September before. So we got to the door, and the RCMP were in his house. And they said, "You can't come in. You can leave your suitcases here, but we have secured the house." And I asked them why, what's going on. And he just said that Ron was across the street. So we went across the street, and we were, bewildered by this, saw the kids. And of course, we were all very emotional. And a lot of people were around. Ron and Brenda had a lot of friends. So it was a very chaotic day in the sense of people coming and going, and all questioning, why are we still not in the house?
I was going to say, at this point, did you have any idea
Absolutely
beyond
none.
the fact that Brenda had passed?
No,
And
nothing.
oh,
So we borrowed the fellow that owned the house. We borrowed his car and took the kids, my mother, myself, and Ron, and we drove to a nearby park just to have a little bit of privacy. But we also tried not to be extremely upset in front of the children, to keep them calm, and kind of made plans to, well, come to PEI the next day. Brenda's parents lived in PEI as well, in the same community that we were from. So they were, calling back and forth. But in those days, there were no cell phones. Makes me sound really old, but, there was not.
I remember those days
Yeah.
too, so it's okay.
So we were there and calling back and forth. We did get arrangements made. I went over to the house because, of course, David was still in diapers. That was Ron's youngest child, was still in diapers. We needed diapers. By supper time, Ron's kids tended to have bedtimes and meal times, normal family things. So we managed to get the kids fed. And then I went over after supper and said, "Look, we need some clothes. We need to put these kids to bed. We need to pack." And they told me, we still couldn't have the house, but they would let me in to pack some clothes for the children. So I went back, got my mother. We went back to the house, and, someone followed us into every room to make sure, I don't know what, but we packed some clothes and we left again. So someone that lived down the street had a crib. So they took David. Ronnie went down there, put him to bed. He was looked after. Adam and Allison ended up going to bed as well. Again, we're waiting. Everybody that came was so bewildered by, well, why aren't you in your house? So I went over again, knocked on the door, and this was around, I don't know, times were hard to remember because
Of course.
Newfoundland was doing the hour and a half time change. They had that one year that they went daylight savings time an hour and a half, and it just messed my timelines up. Um, but around 9:30, 10 o'clock, I went over and I said, what's happening? We need to get things organized for tomorrow. And the fellow that answered the door said, "You bring your brother down to the police station. We need to talk to him." And I was like, "Well, what for?" And he said, "Just clearing a few things up." It was very vague, very casual. So Mom and I and Ron took his car down to the police station, and I drove. As soon as we got into the police station, without a thought or anything, they got Ron in a room and told us to go sit over there. It was just a couple chairs.
And at this point, did Ron have any inclination that things were going to go sideways for him? Like, I mean,
I
because this
think it was
was an
so
accident.
it was so strange. I don't think he realized then. So that
But
was
her passing was an accident, right? So he had
well,
no
she
reason.
coughed. Yeah, she choked. Yes.
So
So
he had no reason to think that
no,
anybody should suspect him of
no.
anything, I would imagine.
They were
And
assuring us that this was normal procedure. They were doing us a favor, really, because we were leaving in the morning. They were doing this at night. This is like 11 o'clock at night, though.
right.
And there's three investigators, and it's like, it didn't feel right to me.
Yeah,
And now I didn't have any experience with the RCMP, so we went along as we were asked to do.
sure. Of
Um,
course.
I had an occasion to answer a question when I was testifying, and the lawyer asked me if today I would do that. And of course, absolutely, I would not. I would never have taken him down there. But I know better now.
Right.
Um,
Well, and I think that's the huge part with wrongful conviction cases especially is that the general public has no exposure to the criminal justice system and they don't know anything other than what they see on Law and Order or
exactly. Yeah.
whatever else,
Mm.
right? So, you know, knowing now, or like what you know now, sure, you would do things differently,
Yes.
but had you not gone through what you went through and you were put in this situation again,
No.
arguably you would probably do the exact same thing
Oh, no
because
doubt. No
you
doubt.
just don't know any better. And I don't mean that maliciously,
No.
like it's just a
And it's a
fact
good
that
thing.
most people don't.
It's a good thing that you don't know any better because it means
True.
you have
Yes.
never been involved, right? So,
Yep.
but we sat there till like it was around 11:30, almost 12 o'clock, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm getting the feeling there's something going on, that there's something wrong. Um, so I called the house that we were staying at, that Ron had been at, and I spoke with the fellow that picked us up that afternoon. And I said, would you have the number of a lawyer? And while I was saying that, I was thinking to myself, oh, Ronnie's going to be so upset with me. But anyway, I called a lawyer, and it was just the bank's lawyer. He gave me the number of the bank's lawyer. I called him. His name was Arch Bonnell. And he said, look, I will call the station. They will not lie to me. If there's something wrong, if there's some more going on, they will tell me because they're obligated to. So I said, okay. I gave him the number that was on the phone that I used so he could call me back. And there was an RCMP officer sitting there. I had asked him to use the phone and he was very cooperative. I gave him that number. Arch called me back within about 15 minutes and he said, no, he said, everything is fine. He said, they are
Huh.
really just clearing things up so you guys can go home tomorrow. And that's what they told him. It wasn't
Wow.
true. And I thought, oh, that's just wonderful. But I'm still thinking there's something wrong here. Art told us to leave, that they said, tell them to leave and we will bring Ron home shortly. So we did. We left. And I went back to the house. My mother, by this time, it was 12:30. She was tired. So I said, Mom, go lay down. Everybody was in bed other than myself, the fellow that owned the house, and the guy from the bank. And we waited and we waited and we waited. And like at quarter after 5:30,
Oh my gosh.
the phone rang and it was Ronnie on the phone. And he said, could you get me a lawyer? And I said, I've got a number.
Oh,
And so I called him and I went down to the station. I didn't wake my mother up. I went down to the station with the fellow that owned the house. And the RCMP met me and said, look, he killed her. And I was like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. And he was very cruel. And I said, these children just lost their mother. and I have to tell them that their father's not going to be there when they wake up in the morning either. And he said, "Tell them, well, tell them whatever, but he could be just on a business trip." And that was how casually I was not able to see Ronnie. They wouldn't let me see him. So I went back to the Hills residence and let my mother sleep till about 7 and got her up and said, "Mom, you probably should take the kids home. Ronnie's not back yet." I think she probably knew, but we all pretended that, she took the kids home. I really knew that the kids needed to get out of Newfoundland because if he was arrested, which he hadn't been at that point, I guess he was around 5:30, 6 o'clock, but I didn't know that.
Right.
I thought, well, the kids would be wards of the court, and we really didn't want that.
Sure.
So mom took the kids home and I stayed, and I went to see this lawyer in the morning, and, you know, like we're brought up to, I guess, trust the police and believe that they're doing everything
100%.
right and everything's going to be good if you do the right things. And
Of course, and you don't have anything to worry about as long
no,
as you tell the truth and
exactly. And why would you need a lawyer? That's what the police said to me. Why
absolutely
would you need a lawyer if you didn't do anything? They can't help you. And if you did do something, they still can't help you. But anyway,
unbelievable.
the lawyer
So
told
what's
me,
going through your mind throughout all of this? Because I mean, this is a lot to unpack
oh,
that you're going
yeah,
through, and it's coming at you so quickly.
so fast. I
How do you cope? Like, or did
I
you?
I'm always thankful that the people that I stayed with then, because I had no choice, were so helpful to me. I didn't know what to do. I had contact with my husband, of course, in Musquesh, but my mother was here by then with the kids. And the next morning, I did go see the lawyer, and he told me two very important things. One, when I did finally get to see Ronnie, not to ask him any questions, not to speak about this, only to tell him that his children were okay. So I did that. Two, not to trust anything that the RCMP told me.
Hmm.
And that's kind of like, I almost felt like I was living a movie. It's like, it's hard to do that
It's
when,
very Kafkaesque, right? Like
yes, yeah,
listening to this story, I'm just thinking it's so Kafkaesque. And then to be told, and don't trust the police when you've
yes,
spent your whole life being raised, being told, trust the police.
exactly. So I did go to court, and he had his arraignment, and they brought him out. He had an orange jumpsuit on and some wool socks, and he looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. And in reality, he hadn't slept in 2 days.
I was going to say probably because he hadn't slept in 2 days.
Well, he hadn't. And all that day, then, after the arraignment, I tried to see him. I would go to the police station, and Mr. Hill was with me. He had taken the day off, and he took me to the police station. And they would say, "No, he's not here. He's at the substation." And then I would go to the substation and they would say, "No, he's not here. He's gone to the police station." 3 times I went to both places. Later, I did find out that Ron could see me coming when he was at the substation. He was
Oh,
upstairs and he could see out the window. He could see us driving in and driving out, driving in, driving out. But each time the police were saying to me, "Now, when you see him, you ask him this, ask him this, ask him this." So thankfully, I had been forewarned a little bit, even though I wasn't fully comprehending just
sure.
how awful they would be. I did get to see him that day, then, eventually around supper time at the police station. And I just did what Arch had said to do. I told him, the kids are home. I'm going home tomorrow. We will be back. We'll apply for bail. And that's how we had to leave it for the first week.
Unbelievable.
I also had a good lawyer of our own just because we had a business and, we had a mortgage, I guess. So I had called him myself just to see what he had to say. And he said exactly the same thing. And
Interesting.
yeah, he said, "Don't trust anything that the RCMP are telling you because they use lying as a tool." And yeah, and they do.
Sadly,
So
that is so true. And
yeah,
again, you don't know it, you don't believe it
No,
until you've been through it,
exactly. You more than believe it after that, though. Believe me.
right? And this is it. It's like your journey or your experience with wrongful conviction is just as profound as Ron's, but in a like in a very different way, obviously, right? But I mean, you are having all of your prior beliefs of the justice
Mhm.
system shaken. You're now a young mother of 6
Yes.
overnight. Your household has doubled literally overnight.
Overnight. Yeah.
And you've lost your brother and sister-in-law. Like that's a lot to
Exactly. Yeah.
happen in a week.
It was a lot. When we came home, then all Ron asked me, and Brenda had a huge extended family. Her mother had a lot of siblings, and he said, just don't let them overwhelm the kids. So it was a private funeral, but there was probably 200 people there as a private
Wow.
funeral. And we left the baby home. My husband and I took the two oldest, and we went to the funeral. But we didn't have time to grieve for Brenda, just to absorb all that. It
Sure.
just, that came 12 years later. It was a horrific time for sure. And when I look back, I probably get more upset than I was at the time because we didn't have time.
I was
We
just
had
going to say you didn't
yeah,
have time or
yeah,
like the emotional capacity to really process
exactly,
everything that was going on at that time.
exactly. We had
And
school, there was 3 kids we had to get to school and 2 new ones that didn't have school supplies, didn't have clothes, didn't have everything they needed. So we managed to do some of that stuff, and we were very busy for sure. As well, there was a bail hearing, so I did go back for that, but we also had to arrange financing to in
mm,
order to come up with some money. So we had arranged for $20,000, say, and but when I got there and I got on the stand, and the judge said, "Well, how much money can you come up with?" I said 30, just because I was thinking, is 20 enough? Or I didn't know, but we managed to come up with it. We were fortunate that we had a good business, and I had a great husband, and just called him up that night and said, "By the way, we need another 10." Yeah.
me and my big mouth,
Yeah.
I've,
Well, and that's
stepped
what
in
it
it
felt like,
again.
it was like, when I look back on it, but it was so scary that he
Yes.
wouldn't get out, that he would,
Yep.
end up wherever. I had visited him at HMP in Newfoundland, and it is like the worst prison you've ever seen on TV. It has the little door and the great big wall, and it's an old, old, old prison. And so you get visions of what's going on inside there.
Sure.
And we didn't want him to have to stay there. And that's probably where he would have been.
Wow.
He did manage to get bail and come home.
Amazing. So I noticed we're just at time for today, but I feel like there's still so much of your story to tell. And I am so interested in hearing what came after. So I'm hoping that you would be willing to join me again next time so we can continue this conversation and continue hearing about yours and Ron's journey through his wrongful conviction.
I would, for sure.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me for this powerful and deeply personal episode. Linda's story is a stark reminder that wrongful convictions don't just impact the person who's put behind bars for a crime they didn't commit. They ripple outward, affecting families, communities, and the very foundations of trust we place in our justice system. As Linda told us, she was thrust into a life altering reality, one where she was suddenly parenting 6 young children, navigating the trauma of loss, and trying to make sense of a system that seemed to turn against her brother overnight. Her courage, resilience, and honesty in sharing this story are inspirational, and truly, they are a beacon to guide the rest of us who remain unaware of how the system really works. Today's conversation is only the beginning of Linda and Ron's journey. There's so much more to explore about what came next, the legal battles, the eventual exoneration, and how their families coped and carried on. And while today's letter may have piqued your interest, this is only part of the story. There's still so much more to tell. The effects of wrongful convictions are far-reaching. They touch us all. I'll write to you again soon as I continue my conversations with those whose lives have been impacted by a wrongful conviction. But until then, I remain wrongfully yours. If you have something that you want to talk about with me, or even if you want to just send me some words of encouragement, you can drop me a line at wrongfullyyourspodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out my website, kellylozon.ca, for more information about me and the kinds of things that I do. And so, if you were touched by this episode, please consider sharing it with others, liking and following the podcast on your favorite platform so you don't miss what comes next. And as always, thank you for listening to Wrongfully Yours, where we believe that telling these stories is the first step towards preventing the next injustice. And until next time, stay curious, stay hopeful, and keep fighting for justice.